Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about a few things that you need to be doing to your rods and reels to make sure they perform better for you over the lifetime of you owning them, and that you don't lose any fish come springtime once you start fishing again. So stay tuned and let's get right into it. So up here in the north, we do not get to fish for typically 2 to 3 or even 4 months out of the year due to snow and ice and just not being able to get out there with everything being frozen. Some places you do get to fish all year and some of this stuff might not apply, but there's a couple things that you want to check every year just to make sure that your equipment is performing to its best of its abilities, lasts longer for you, and you don't lose any fish because of a simple overlooked thing on your fishing rod or your reel. We spend a lot of money on our rods and reels as fishermen. It's probably one of the most expensive things we own other than a boat or electronics maybe, if you have that. But we want to take good care of this stuff and make sure it lasts a really long time and performs the best for us. So we're going to start with the reel today. There's a few things that I do on the reel, and then we're going to go to the rod and a couple things you need to do here. It'll have it performing awesome for you, and none of this requires any fancy equipment, taking the reel apart, any of that stuff. This is just a simple checklist. Even if you get to fish year-round, if you live in like Florida or Texas, take a day at the end of the season when the fishing's not good or a rainy day, take all your rods, run through all this stuff and make sure it's working properly, put them all back together and keep fishing. That's all you need to do. It's going to be a very simple video to make sure you get your money's worth out of the rod and reel that you're using. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually remove the reel from the rod. This isn't necessary, but it gives me a chance to look underneath what's under the reel seat, if there's anything under there that could be corroding, or even on the reel seat. Basically, it's just going to give us a chance to clean everything off. So I'll separate all my rods and reels, and then I will start with my reel. So the first thing that I'm going to do on my reel, I love to crank my drag all the way down and just use the thumb bar to let line out whenever I have a fish on. The problem with that is as this drag is cranked all the way down, if you crank this down and never moved it, what's going to happen is the springs and washers are slowly going to start to loosen up, wear impressions in each other and stuff like that, and your drag will actually start to get weaker over time. So if your reel has like 20 pounds of drag and you let it sit like this forever, it will slowly weaken up to 19 pounds, 18 pounds, and over time it'll just get weaker and weaker. What I like to do, especially up here in the Northeast like we talked about, I don't fish for a couple months. I take my drag and just back it all the way off. I will take my drag completely off to nothing. I will loosen it as loose as I can get it, leave it sit like that all winter. The problem is you have to remember to turn some of this stuff back on once spring rolls around, or you'll set the hook on a fish and your drag will come right out. So remember what you did to put it away and do it the opposite to put it back on your rod come springtime. The second thing I like to do is we set our spool tension knobs to perform for the baits that we're using on our reel. That is also tightening this up, and it has the same effect as the drag. So if you leave this applied at all time, it'll stop performing the way it's meant to because you're leaving it cranked down and tight. So I don't take the cap off entirely, but I'll basically just loosen this up just a little bit, basically give it some room to breathe so that the cap won't come off, but it's just looser. Basically the spool should be, you can wiggle the spool around in there back and forth and have some play in it. It just gives this chance for all the springs, washers, and other components in here, gives them a chance to breathe over the winter and perform properly whenever you turn the drag up or down. Same with the spool tension knob. The other thing that I will do, this is not necessary either, but if you have any centrifugal brakes or just regular magnetic brakes, I basically just turn those off just like I do with this stuff for the winter. Just give them a time to relax. That's all. I loosen everything up on my reel so that it doesn't have tension under it 24/7, 365 days a year. Then the next thing I'm going to do is actually, if I have fluorocarbon or monofilament line on here, I will take it off. All of it. It will not be good by the time spring rolls around. Again, if you fish 365 days a year, leave that on there and just keep fishing. You don't have to do this step. But if you fish up in the Northeast here, where you don't get to fish for a couple months, this stuff will be bad come springtime. So I just take it off. I'll put new line on when springtime rolls around. If you have braid on here, you do not need to take it off because it will not have any memory. It'll still be good come springtime. So I'll leave all the braid on my reels and I'll take off all the fluorocarbon and monofilament. And then once I have the line off, have everything loosened up, I will clean my reel a little bit. Essentially all I do is take a Q-tip and rub the reel anywhere there might be some dirt and start to wipe that away. I can take a rag too to try and wipe some of that stuff away as well. I just try and keep it a little bit cleaner than sometimes you get all that gunk build up in there whenever you're fishing some grass mats or anything like that. I try and just wipe that stuff away because if you let it get too far gone, some of that stuff might get into your gears and stuff down here. And if you have too much buildup, it'll actually jam your reel and it won't reel left or right, or things like that can happen. So I basically just rub a couple different places on my reel here, like this worm gear. And the key, this is the one that can actually cost you some fish in the springtime if you don't notice it. I will take this Q-tip and stick it in the eye here where the line comes out. If you rub it on there and any type of Q-tip fuzz gets stuck on here when you pull it out, there is a nick in there and you need to get that fixed. You either need to send it back and get it fixed, or you might have to replace the reel entirely depending on what you bought and where you bought it. But if that is nicked, anytime you set the hook, if your line touches that, especially fluorocarbon or mono, it is going to break whenever that happens. That shouldn't happen often or ever if you take good care of your equipment, but I just like to check it. It takes 1 second to stick the Q-tip in there, take a look at it, and make sure everything's good. Then basically I'll run around the reel, make sure all my screws are on here, and I'm not missing anything, and that reel is good to put away and fish with in the springtime. So then we'll get into the rod, and there's a couple things I do on the rod here to make sure everything's good. Again, some of it's just cleaning and maintenance to make sure everything's performing properly, and some of it is actually making sure we don't lose any fish come springtime. So again, I'm going to start with just cleaning the rod up to make sure everything's good. I'll take a rag, maybe a little bit of water, kind of wipe this stuff away that's on the reel seat to make sure nothing ever gets stuck on the reel and corrodes it, like any type of water or chemicals or dirt or anything. I'll clean that up to make sure that's all good. Make sure nothing gets stuck in the actual screw for your reel to tighten it down. And I'll basically just wipe up the rod blank all along the rod, kind of clean it up with a wet rag, just to make sure there's nothing on the rod and keep it clean. Another thing that I will do is actually clean my cork handles. So when you get a rod, it comes with these super pristine cork handles that are super nice, clean, everything. And then you know how it is, you go out there and fish, you got sweaty hands, fish slime, catfish, they get it all dirty and they start to look like this. We're going to show you how to clean this up. All you need is a Mr. Clean magic eraser right here. You're going to dip this in some water, wring it out so it's just damp, and then you will rub it on the actual cork handle gently. You don't have to like grind in there and do it. You just rub it back and forth and you'll slowly start to see that black stuff and dark marks come off your cork until it basically is all gone, and then you cleaned up your cork. I'll take that same rag, dry, and I'll wipe it off and get all the dust and dirt and everything like that in the water off the cork handle. And then once it's dry, it'll look good as new and you're ready to fish with it again. One thing you can do before you ever fish with these rods when you buy them is buy this U40 Cork Seal here. If you apply this to your cork handle before you ever fish with them, they'll still get dirty, but they'll be 90 times easier to clean up than if you don't seal the cork beforehand. So what this is going to do is actually seal like you would seal wood. So all the filler pieces or different cork pieces that are in there, what they put these cork rings together, those will stay in a lot longer. You won't get the cork falling out of your rod as easily. The dirt will come off a lot easier, and it'll just make it a lot easier to fish with cork handles if you apply this stuff. You basically just take a paintbrush, wipe it on your rod, and then let it sit, and you're good to go. So you can see once you take that Mr. Clean eraser and rub this rod down on the cork, it'll never bring it back to fully brand new. So you're going to have some dirt that gets trapped in here. Even if you put that cork sealer on, it will make them look a little bit darker than the cork actually does the day you buy them. But it will look clean again. It'll look nice, and it'll take care of the cork to keep all the contaminants off of that stuff and to make sure it doesn't seep down in the cork here and actually break it down over time. That's why I like to clean these up. And then the last but most important thing to do to your rods before you take them out for the spring again, I got my Q-tip back, and you probably guessed it, we're going to go ahead and run this Q-tip through every eye on the rod in each rod that I own. If you stick it through there and any little Q-tip bits come off on the guide, you need to replace that guide. If you're missing an insert or the guide is chipped, anytime you set the hook on that, it will literally break your line. It's literally like pulling your line through a cheese grater if it doesn't have the insert or it's nicked. Every time you cast out and reel in, you're just destroying your line as you reel it through that guide. So you need to either replace it or replace the rod or anything, send it back to get repaired, whatever you need to do. You need to fix that guide before you start fishing with that rod again, or it's going to cost you fish and baits in the long run. If you enjoyed today's video talking all about the maintenance you need to be doing to your rods to take care of them over time, go ahead and click this video right here where I talked about everything you need to know about fishing rods to pick the right one while you're in the store. And if you enjoyed today's video, leave a like down below and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any more of my fishing tips coming up.